Since 1976, every 2nd of June is set aside to draw attention to the inhuman working conditions that sex workers have to go through. The marking of the day began in France, where sex workers facing increasing pressure from the police were forced to work in secret, which led to more violence against them.
When it comes to human rights, now many of the challenges of that sex workers face is due to criminalization and discrimination. Can you tell us some
Mm.
more of these challenges that sex workers face in the industry?
The most common ones are the random arrests and harassment, especially by law enforcement, and also access to law enforcement is a huge challenge, as many of them, because it is a criminalized activity, sexual activity, they would face a lot of challenges with law enforcement, client exploitation and abuse because they don't have regulated markets, and it's also not necessarily legally enforced. So then they have issues with clients and exploitation and abuses as well. Access to other services, like for example, banking, setting up your account and having to prove your source of income, that is legitimate according to the banks and according to your country's laws. So that could also be a big challenge, because that also affects the security. And then we come to access to health resources, as many of them, in as much as they face all of these many law enforcement issues, there are also a lot of health risks involved. So I will definitely touch on them as we continue.
A protest demanding decent working conditions and an end to stigmatization was a precursor to the movement and the day, which is now known as the Sex Workers' Day.
Do you think at this point in time, Africa or African countries and African leaders should come together and actually recognize this profession officially?
It is very, very multi-layered and multifold, right? Because I can already speak to Namibia's own laws, for example, right? And criminalized according to the Combating of Immoral Practices Act of 21 of 1980. It was inherited by independence by an apartheid government, and that was a colonial government at the time. So carnal sexual intercourse between persons who are not married was unlawful carnal intercourse, and that was the act that was criminalized. And this forbids certain sexual conduct in the context of sex work, for example. And so the statute does not necessarily, in our country, the statute does not necessarily criminalize the actual act of, as they call it, prostitution, which we know is sex work, but how they describe it is engaging in sex for reward. The acts which are criminalized by the statute are primarily public manifestations of sex work.
The day, which is mostly recognized in France, Germany, and some other countries, is slowly gaining worldwide recognition. In Africa, the phrase sex work, otherwise known as prostitution, comes with stigma, discrimination, danger, and so much more.
Violence runs amok in spaces that are not regulated legally or recognized legally. And before a sex worker responds to their health, their safety is often always threatened, the first thing, right? And this speaks to the forms of sexual violence like stalking, rape, and the client does not maybe want to use protection or use a condom. So in order to be safe, they eventually expose themselves, hence the increase. So that's why they would prioritize safety before health first. And hence you would find that the HIV prevalence cases amongst sex workers are highest and contribute a lot because of the fact that if they are not safe, legally and regulated, and I even speak to the aspect of violence, then that is the only thing that they will prioritize first.
However, when we talk about human rights, the fundamental human rights of every individual, inclusive of sex workers and underrepresented members of the community, is paramount.
All right, Ndilo, thank you so much. But finally, what measures should be taken to make sex work safer or more safe?
It's really to make sure that, first of all, safety is important. You cannot have equality without safety in any given community. So services to law enforcement should at least be more accessible. Adult men and women will also need protection against exploitation, for example, in Namibia, by pimps, and against being drugged or detained for the purposes of sex, no matter how sex work is regulated in a given space. So if that statute were to be repealed, for example, in Namibia, at least some of it would need to be replaced with more well-crafted and gender-neutral protections against various sexual abuses. So it's really about regulation and safety.